And then we could go ahead and start. So welcome, everybody. Thank you again for joining us in one of our Gazarian Real Estate Center events. Today, we are joined and co-hosting this event with the California Water Institute and London Properties. I'm going to do introductions in a second, but the topic today is particularly relevant, and not just particularly for rural residential properties, but for, everybody. Water these days, it's a topic of that everybody is very much concerned about. So, well, today we are going to focus particularly on rural residential areas. So a little bit of history, I guess, behind, and Laura can. But first, let me introduce Laura Ramos. She is the Associate Director of Research and Education for the California Water Institute. And she's the one who actually brought up this idea many moons ago, but we finally, made it happen. And she can, talk about what the idea is in depth. And then I invited Patrick Connor and Barbara Gallagher from London Properties to also talk about from the real estate side on the impact of, groundwater and water issues on residential sales. And so without further ado, let me pass it on to Laura, and she'll start with the water side, and then we'll pass it on to Patrick and talk about the real estate side. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, AJ, and thank you so much for hosting us today and for going along with my idea. As AJ said, it was an idea that came up from different conversations with several drinking water advocates organizations throughout the valley that felt that there was some homeowners that weren't as knowledgeable about their private wells as they should be, or that they have private wells. And we were trying to figure out how can we get out the message and educate some of them. And so one of the idea that we thought was, that there's going to be a lot of ways that people get their information and they get educated, but we thought one of the important one is when you're purchasing a home. And so we thought that if we came to some of the real estate agents, you all might help us educate those potential homeowners that are going to have their only source of water come from a private well, know a little bit more about what that means and what does it entail, what are their responsibilities, and what are some of the resources that are available to them. So let me share my screen. And so today I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to talk about private wells, but we will go a little bit into non-private wells and a few other things. But before I get started, let me tell you a little bit about the California Water Institute. So the California Water Institute has 3 divisions at Fresno State, and we focus on everything water. Our division then specifically focuses on the research and education of water in the San Joaquin Valley and making connections between all of California and the university. So we connect California and the university with faculty, staff, and students, depending on the research or educational needs. So we are the conduit to connecting the two. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to have multiple topics, and I'm going to start a little bit of an overview of where does our water come from. Not too in depth, but just very broad overview. I'm going to tell you a little bit of facts about wells. We're going to go into laws and regulations. We're going to talk about a little bit about construction, water quality, the operation and maintenance for the owners, as well as what do you do if your well goes dry. The session today, we have about 20-ish minutes for my session, and so I couldn't go completely in depth, but we hope that today you get a broad enough overview that you are able to understand or gain a little bit more knowledge than what you had before you attended today about wells, and that you can help us educate community members. So as I said, the first topic is going to be, where does our water come from? And so there are two main sources of where our water comes from. It can come from a municipality. So this is to represent the city of Fresno and then Clovis. And so it can come from a municipality where they get water either from groundwater or from surface water. They process it through a treatment plant, and they send the water to all of the homes that are part of their municipality. That means that you get a water bill every month, but it also means that if you run out of electricity, that doesn't mean you run out of water. If there is all of a sudden a groundwater contaminant, you don't have to worry because the water is treated by the city, and the city will provide you. So the chances of you running out of water if you're in a municipality are extremely low, because the municipalities have backup plans. Now, what I want to bring your attention to next is this home right over here in the edge that has a well directly into the groundwater aquifer. So if you don't live within the city limits or close enough to municipality, the chances are that your water is coming from a private well. And as you can see on this one closer, it can be in rural areas, either far from the city or close to the city, but they're not connected and their water is coming directly from an aquifer. And so how many of those homes are there that have water that comes from aquifer? So you might think that there isn't that many, but there actually is a lot. There is approximately 2 million groundwater wells in California. Not all of them are for private residential use. Some are for municipalities, ag, and other interests, but there are over 2 million groundwater wells in California. And we add anywhere between 7,000 to 15,000 new wells per year. California actually has, on average, uses 40% of its water is coming from the ground. So yes, we get some from rain, from the reservoirs, the rivers, but still 40% of California's residents get water, 40% from groundwater. And poorly constructed and maintained wells can endanger our groundwater quality, not just for us, but for our neighbors as well. And so what is the first thing that needs to get done when you need a well? So you're going to go to a company that is going to be a well driller, and typically they will pull a permit. Just like when you're doing any other construction in your home, the construction company will work to get the necessary permits. And so they go to the any permits for groundwater extraction will go through the Department of Water Resources. And there, I'm just showing you a screen of where these agencies come from, but they also knew there is a groundwater regulation that I'll talk about in a second that is not restricting, but is reducing the amount of, hoping to reduce the amount of our dependency on groundwater so that we can be more sustainable. And so some of those permits from the counties and from the water board or the water resources, Department of Water Resources, have to consult with groundwater sustainability agencies. And so a little bit about that law. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act became a law in 2014, and it stated that California needed to be groundwater sustainable by the year 2040 for some of them, and then 2042 for other areas. And so if you think about our groundwater, think of it as your savings account. Our surface water, when it rains, and what comes from the river is your checking account that sometimes can fluctuate if you're not on an hour, or if you're an hourly employee and you work more or less. So think of that as the rain. Some years it rains a lot, you have a lot more in your water bank, and some years it rains less, you get less water. But our groundwater is more of our savings account. And so we need to add to our savings account and take out of it. But be sustainable long term. And when this law came into effect was because at the rate that we were going and we were pulling out so much groundwater that we were not going to be sustainable long term. And that meant that a lot of wells were going to go dry and not be able to provide the water that they needed to. And so some of agencies were created to monitor a specific area and to create projects and actions that help that area become sustainable. And so that is why in this slide, I mentioned that the counties need to consult with the Groundwater Sustainability Agency so that everybody knows any new wells that are going in. There are also other rules, not just about putting in a well, but where you can put the well. So there, it should not be, a well should not be within 50 feet of any sewers, watertight septic tanks, cesspools and seepage pits, or any animal or fowl enclosures. So that is just to protect the quality of your water. In California, there are 3 ways that wells are constructed, but in California and then specifically in the Central Valley, the most typical one is the one that are drilled. And then, so as you see here, this is what a typical well will look like underneath the ground. This is everything we don't see. And so if you're going to visit a home, you're going to see what's up here and not everything that's down underneath the ground. And so if you see here, this is the well. There is some water right in here. There is some clay here that might have a tiny little bit of water, but there's some water right in here. Then there's some more clay, and then there's some additional water down here. And so this well is this deep, but the well screen could be higher depending on where you put it. Like if this person wanted to pull water from right here, even though the well was made this deep, they can pull water from the end or anywhere in between if they have the filter pack and some of the screen installed. And so they have options depending on the depth of their well. Every time a new well is constructed, there are well completion reports. So if anybody ever wanted to know, was there a permit pulled? Is there a map of all of the wells around me where I'm purchasing? You can go to the well permitting, well completion reports online that the Department of Water Resources provide, and then you can see and get some additional information on those specific wells. And now I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the wells. So if you see here is an example of a well. Down here, you probably have heard the word aquifer, or that, you know, the water is underneath their ground and that there's different aquifers. So if you think of this as the San Joaquin Valley or another area, mountains kind of form a tub underneath. And so our groundwater is made up of different tubs. And so your neighbor can be in a completely different tub than yours because of the geography and everything that is the rocks and everything that is underneath the ground. So water can move around depending on, like I said, rocks or anything else that is underneath, and follow where the pumps are pulling. This example here, let me get closer. This that you see the arrows going down is that water doesn't only come up from groundwater. We can also recharge it. So as I talked about earlier, putting some more money into our savings account or water into the ground, it happens from the river, water percolating into the groundwater. It can happen from us watering our grass at home, and your grass is going to grab the amount of water that it needs. The excess one will go down to the groundwater. Or if you see recharge areas like leaky acres, if you are on 168 and you look towards Clovis, near the Ashland exit, you'll see a lot of areas with some water in there, and they almost look like tiny little shallow lakes, but they're actually recharge basins. And so it's using water that is from the surface and putting it in there so that it can recharge our groundwater. And so that is what the arrows are showing. So your level right in this picture, this shows the level of the water for that area, but that can change from 6 months to the next 6 months. It can go down and get lower depending on all of the people that are pulling water from that tub, or it can get higher if it's a high rain year, if there's a lot of groundwater recharge happening around you, if there's water going through the river. So it is never a really steady line. Here it just shows a straight line, but it isn't a representation on what it is. So if you do a test to see how deep the water table is in your well, in a specific well, that can change in a month. And so it is a very specific point in time where that is. And so as you see here, this is the end of the well for this one, and it's pulling water up as it needs it. And so you have a little bit of space. So I'm going to use my sister's home as an example. She lives in an area where she has a private well. She lives in Easton. The other day I asked her how deep her well is. So her well is at 115 feet. You can do it at 50, 200, 1,000. The deeper the well, the more expensive it is, the higher energy cost it is to pull the water up, but the more options you have of your well not going dry. So for example, my sister's is at 115. We checked with monitoring wells that are around her area and other neighbors. They believe that the water level around her is at 105 feet. So that means that she only has about 10 feet of water available to her. There are some resources that you could see about what that level is going down in your area. And based on some information and some research we did, we estimate that around her home, the water is reducing, the water table is being reduced by about 10 feet every 6 months. So if that continues like that, the water level is going to be below where the end of her well is, and that well will not be pulling out any water. Now, it could not be pulling water today, but let's say next week, it could have a little bit, because the level can slightly move up and down a little bit based on everything else that's happening around you. So let's say her well was constructed at 200 feet, but the end or where the water's being pulled is at 105. That means that her well can be extended without completely doing a new well. So there's options for expanding the well, lowering the pump, or putting in a brand new well. It just depends on the age, on what was done to construct it. So let's say that this one was placed at 200, but the pump was placed at 100. If your well goes dry, you can lower that as easier than building a brand new one. So that your well went dry doesn't always mean that you need a brand new well. It just means that you might have to do some expansion of it or put in a brand new one. So let's say your well goes dry and you have family members or you know people that are completely out of water today, which, unfortunately, there's a lot in the San Joaquin Valley. There are resources that are available for emergency services. So you can contact your county health department, or you can visit Call Self-Help Enterprises or visit mywellwentdry.com. Depending on what county you are, there's a list there of the organizations that can help you. This is an example of some of the emergency resources that they can do. Self-Help Enterprise can bring out a tank, and depending on how many people live in that home, they will haul water weekly and help you build a long-term sustainable solution. A water tank or bottled water is a temporary solution to make sure that you get water today and you're not out of water for 6 months. But they will also work with the member or the homeowner to look for a long-term solution and see if there's any grants or funding available to help that homeowner. Sadly, today there are over 1,000 of these tanks in the 8 counties San Joaquin Valley. That means that over 1,000 homes have completely ran out of water. And because of the driller schedule and the amount of problems during the drought, these wells are going dry and people are running out of water. So fortunately, there is some help. The other thing that can happen to a well, not necessarily is just that it goes dry, and especially when the drought hits, but there's also water quality. And so sometimes the quality of your water, because you are the homeowner, the water isn't treated when it's being pulled out of the groundwater. And so water contamination can happen in very many different areas and come from different sources. They could be bacteria, they could be nitrates, they can be heavy metals, or some of the other chemical solvents. And so if a well does get contaminated, it needs to be discontinued right away. And it can happen for multiple things. A seal can be broken, it wasn't maintained, or the discharge pipe is not maintained, and they should stop using the water, boil them. And then, so you might ask yourself, like, what causes some of this contamination? And it comes, like I said earlier, from multiple sources and different types. So some comes from agriculture, from fertilizers that are being used, animal feedlot, animal waste. Others can come from commercial, which can be airports, railroad tracks, junkyard recycling, and water transfer stations, auto repair shops, anything that uses a chemical, that chemical ends up in the ground, and then it rains or water flows and is pushing those contaminants down to the groundwater. Others can be industry, such as oil and gas production storages. If a gas station has a crack in the storage units underneath them and now it's leaking, that gas is going into our groundwater aquifer, but also residential. It can come from household chemicals. If you drop a bucket of paint or a bucket of swimming pool chemicals, or your septic tank starts leaking. So it doesn't come from just one place in one location. And then others are from landfills, sewer lines. Damage can just happen, and so it will contribute to the contamination of our groundwater. But also, just as I mentioned earlier, water level can go up and down slightly between months to months, but also contamination can too. This here represents a contamination plume. So if you've seen, when you put oil into water, it doesn't dilute, it just kind of stays all together and moves slowly. So think of a plume that way. This could be a gas station that was up here and it has a hole in it, and now the gas is leaking. It's going to move as a plume. And so your well could be completely healthy today and not be tomorrow. But also that plume could also move past your well. And just because there's a contaminant there today doesn't mean there's a contaminant there next month. But if you do find contaminants, one of the things that we recommend is that you test them annually to see what the quality of the level is, and to see if there are contaminants, what kind are there. And there are, for nitrates and nitrogen, there are a lot of programs around the San Joaquin Valley that are specifically focused on helping combat nitrogens and those contaminants in your groundwater, and will provide bottled water for you. And so we do recommend that you test them and that you look for the specific contaminants. But as I mentioned, they could be there one day and not the next, but just because they're moving together as plumes. And your well should be maintained and, like I said, tested once a year, and then inspected to make sure it's pressurized, and don't mix any chemicals at or near your pump. Maintain everything around the pump clear, and then disinfect storage tanks with an unscented bleach solution. And Allison is going to help me by providing some miscellaneous resources in the chat if you want to visit some of these websites that have information on where to get the water tested, where is the information on some of the water levels around you, because they do ground monitoring levels. And that is all for me. So thank you for joining me. I will take some questions. AJ, are we doing questions now or at the end?
Let's just do them at the end, but actually I have one, or maybe just an add-on to something. Isn't salinization of groundwater one big concern, right, these days?
So
Or
desalinization is a way of, desalinization is a way of providing water. And usually it's a municipality that is, I showed the picture at the beginning where if a city has, needs to provide water, and right now they either get it from groundwater or they get it from the river. They could also get it from desal plants. And so there's concerns with desal plants. One, yes, it's another way that we can provide water to our constituents, but second, the energy cost to produce water is very, very high, or to desal the water. And there's still a lot of concerns of what do we do with that salt that is left over after you take it out of the desal. So, you don't want to put it back into the ocean because it's not going to get diluted. Eventually it's going to hurt the ecosystem in the ocean. So there's still the energy, and what to do with the salt after are the biggest concerns.
well, let's just hold on for questions at the end, and then we'll have Patrick talk about the real estate side, and then we'll have a Q&A session, in about 20 minutes. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Patrick, you have the floor.
There we go. Laura, that's going to be hard to follow, and you have pretty pictures. None of my stuff is nearly as attractive as yours, so you're going to make it rough on me. Okay, we're going to just start with a quick synopsis of what we are seeing right now with water in the real estate community. Now more than ever, well, first of all, we have people who've lived in the valley forever, and we've always heard about, and we have experienced drought. I remember as a kid, putting something like a brick, right, or a bucket, something in the tank of the toilet to take up volume, right, so that you didn't have as much water being used when you were flushing. But and we've now, and I'm going to touch on this a little bit, and have come out with water saving plumbing fixtures. But in the valley, we've lived with this, it seems like, forever. But what we are seeing, and we're seeing it now more than ever, are people moving to the Central Valley because of our affordable housing, and they've never experienced a water shortages at their homes like we have, it seems like. So we'll get a buyer, for example, who buys up in YLP or up in Corskool, the mountain area, and they've come here from Oxnard or Ventura, and they just always open up the water valve to garden or to do whatever as much as they want, and they have water. Well, we have these buyers move in, they may get a well productivity report, but they don't know what that is. So they blow through it. We had a case several years ago where a buyer from Los Angeles County came here, bought up in the mountains. They watered their garden. They did a few things outside, and they went in to take a shower and do a load of laundry. They had no water. And come to find out, their well productivity report showed that the well was producing, I kid you not, half a quart a minute of water. So as soon as they went through their supply, they were going to be without water for a long period of time. So and that one got a little bit colorful before we got through it, but it's just a good example about how this is an issue that a lot of people don't even think about, right? We provide a report and then they don't understand it, maybe it doesn't get explained to them appropriately, and we have issues that that come from that. So anyway, I think a growing concern here, and most people don't realize that impact. AJ, should we just go ahead and start with some of the forms? I thought that I would go ahead and start with some standard forms that we have through the California Association of Realtors by way of disclosures and advisories, and then touch on I think two that we have as a company, and it's not atypical for a company to have some of their own. AJ, let me see. Are you able to pull that down, or should I pull that down? Are you able to drive that form, or should I be able to?
I'll drive it. Just let me know. I thought it started with the the title or whatever. I don't know.
Perfect. So this is just a standard form that we would use with every transaction where there is a well or septic system. And if we go down a little bit, well, inspection and allocation of costs. This is just some of the pragmatic part, I think, of a real estate transaction that I will touch on. So government report, seller shall provide to buyer if the seller's possession the state of California well completion report. And you mentioned that, Laura, in your presentation. Typically a seller does not have that. Typically a seller does not go out and get that at the point of listing their home for sale. So we get into a situation as below, where B, water productivity, buyer or seller shall pay for water productivity testing provided by. Typically we'll see the seller provide that. In a lot of ways, I'm of the opinion that we should be asking the buyer to choose what company, the seller to then pay for it, perhaps pay for up to a certain limit, because we see things like that. People say, well, you're just going to have the cheapest well company out there. We want ABC well company. Fine. We'll do that, but we'll only pay up to $500. As the seller may limit what they will pay for a well report. Typically what we also see is just testing for bacterial testing. Paragraph C, that seller shall pay for testing of bacterial contaminants, right, including fecal matter, etc. Sometimes, right, buyers will take a deeper dive, chemical, radiological testing, and at that point, we would probably see a buyer, paying for more specialized tests to the water. So again, that's just a standard. I just gave us, I believe, the first page of that form. I talked a little bit about uses. So this is a real estate transfer disclosure statement. It's a statute, right? Disclosure on every transaction of single family 1 to 4 units. There are very few exemptions of this, but if like a probate or a court ordered sale, this would not have to be filled out. But AJ, if we scroll down, one of the little check boxes here is water conserving plumbing fixtures. It can be a tricky box, and let's go to the next page, page 2 of the TDS, and I have this highlighted for us. So building standard codes, right? And the civil code requires all single family residential residences built on or before January 1st, 94 to be equipped with water conserving plumbing fixtures after January 1, 2017. Additionally, right after January 2014, if single family residence built on or before January 1994 that is altered or improved is required to be equipped with water conserving plumbing fixtures as a condition of final approval. Fixtures in this dwelling may not comply. So overall, far-reaching, this is the code. So if we live, let's say if you live in a home right now that was built prior to 1994, and you don't have water conserving plumbing fixtures, right, and you go to do a remodel, well, the city could say, or county, right, hey, you have got to retrofit, right, your property with water conserving plumbing fixtures, right? That may or may not, right, happen. We get into a little bit of a predicament If, for example, a buyer purchases a home and then they go to do this remodel, right? And then maybe they didn't read the fine print here, and now a seller, right, or depending on what the seller's associate may have represented, could have an issue because this is not an inexpensive item, right? If you think about every faucet, every plumbing fixture, shower head, tub, etc., in a home, that could have to have a plumbing fixture or plumbing fixtures rather changed out. So we ask sellers to be really careful what they disclose. They may have redone their bathroom, but they and put water conserving plumbing fixtures in there, but they did not throughout the rest of the house. So be careful not to check that box on the first page without clearly limiting their comments to what few fixtures were changed out. Anyway, I also bring this up just by way of education with water shortage. I know this is a little outside of our realm of wells, but this is the stuff that drains wells, right, in residences. Certain counties at Los Angeles, for example, San Diego, they do have point of sale retrofit requirements where a seller might be responsible for installing water conserving plumbing fixtures at the point of sale. Statewide, that is not the requirement. Locally, we do not have that requirement, but some counties and areas do. I hope that kind of helps a little bit. Let's go ahead and scroll down and see what we have next here. AJ, I believe this is part of what we call our seller statewide, rather, buyer and seller advisory at the very bottom of this 14-page form, right? Well and water systems, right? Buyer and seller, and I won't read all this, I won't bore you, but buyer and seller advise that the property may be served, right, by one or more water wells. It goes on. AJ, maybe skip down 3 or 4 lines, and a sentence in the middle there starts with broker, right? So broker recommends that buyer consult with a licensed qualified well and pump company and local government agency to determine whether any wellspring or water system will adequately serve buyer's intended use, and that buyers have a well consultant perform and extend well output tests for this purpose. And then other language, right? So this is one of the big disclosures upfront to a buyer to perform adequate inspections during their inspection period, which typically is 17 days from when they go into contract. And then AJ, I think there's, scroll down a little bit, same disclosure form within these 14 pages, but paragraph 17, water shortages and conservation. Right, buyer and seller are advised that the property may be located in an area that could experience water shortages. The policies of local water districts in the city or county in which the property is located can result in the occurrence of any or all of the following. So again, just blanket disclosures. I'll interject here. We have some different areas in Fresno, Madera, Merced, Kings counties that kind of our footprint where we serve, but we may not think of it. But you gave a great example, Laura, of your sister-in-law in Easton, where she may only have 10 feet right before her well could be dry. So several years ago, some people on the Zoom here may recall an area of town on the northeast side of town called Appaloosa Acres. Several homes built in the 70s and even more recently out there, 80s, 90s to currently. But Appaloosa Acres they were having wells run dry on a consistent basis out there, and those homeowners were having to do, Laura, just what you said, and that's truck water in. Very expensive to do that, and you can have wells vary just hundreds of yards away. Some guy may hit water at 200 feet, and somebody else could go down several hundred feet more and not hit it. It's just the way that underground systems can work. So anyway, another paragraph there. AJ, let's keep going there to a next form. It's called a buyer investigation advisory. So again, on this advisory, availability, right, use restrictions, cost, water quality adequacy, right, conditions, performances of well systems and components, the type, size, adequacy. So again, just trying to make as many places as possible the disclosure to the buyer to perform adequate inspections. And then let's go down a little further. AJ, we'll go to the next form. This is one of our proprietary advisories or addendums. It's 6 pages long, and I believe it's in paragraph, there we go, 18, right? Contaminated water advisory. I also just wanted to point out a few things that happen. This is outside of wells, this first paragraph, but sometimes water can become contaminated. This was the issue we saw several years ago, northeast part of Fresno, where they said that galvanized water pipes were failing that builders had used in recent decades. So this is a disclosure to check with the city of Fresno as to the potability and the effects of any pollutants, right, and the water being provided to those homes. And then that next paragraph, governmental agencies, right, have found, we're back to wells now, that some water wells in the city of Fresno contain excessive levels of TCP, right? And Laura, I think you had at least 2 others in your presentation. Maybe if you see some things we should add here, by all means, let us know. We want to be as informative as possible, but a chemical solvent introduced to underground water as a result of previous pesticides and or industrial uses. So again, trying to put the buyer on notice that again, a well system isn't just treated by the city. As you said, you're not just guaranteed to have pure water and potable water. That needs to be tested, and then possibly further investigations, right, if traces of anything have been found. And then AJ, let's go down just a little bit further. I think we have one more paragraph here, 22, water regulations and availability. Again, due to severe drought conditions, water has been restricted by many California counties, municipalities, water authorities. Again, we just go on to the availability of water. And then we have one more advisory. This is again, one of our own. We'll not read this, but again, just a drought advisory, right? Understood and agreed, right, with London Properties. And I won't, again, bore you with that language other than AJ to scroll right there. Again, due to severe, scroll just a little bit right here. Due to severe drought conditions, water has been restricted by many California municipalities and water authorities. And then again, these shortages may be controlled by the municipality, or there are going to be shortages right to the well and whether or not that well produces. All right, AJ, I guess I can bounce out of the shared screen and just go back live here for a minute. Hope that provides a little bit of help as to how we advise a client and things that can happen. We also have several associates in our company that deal in farm and ag land, and these could be a gentleman farm or gentle person farm, I guess I should say. 5 or 10, 20 acres to thousands of acres. But we had an issue just in the last 30 days. It's a smaller parcel, say 120 acres, but the day after close of escrow, the farmer went to irrigate that land, and then his neighbors right around him had been irrigating for the past couple of weeks and had sucked the well dry. So what appeared to be, as you said, Laura, that he had plenty of water producing. People around him, right, had recently used that water and had lowered the water table, and we were able to do a remedy with that. He was able to get in and extend, or will be able to get in and extend the depth of his well, but you can have that real easily, right? Just a drain on the water table, given who might be irrigating around you. So real life problems, we see it, and it's not going away, to the point where some of our associates that, again, do farm and ag land might not even venture into certain districts where they would have 10 or 20 years ago. One of our associates just this last 30 days had a referral for one of our ag people to sell 40 acres of cherries just southeast of Bakersfield. And all of our ag folks said, I don't want to touch it. I do not know what is going on with water down in that district. I'm highly familiar, this quote, right? I'm highly familiar with the Fresno Irrigation District or the Madera Irrigation District, or Kings, but I don't know exactly what's going on south of Bakersfield. So again, it's a problem. And again, that spans out a little bit beyond what we've talked about with residential wells. But as we continue to build out in all of our communities, right, from the city centers, where this issue is impacting us. So I hope that helps a little bit with an overview.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Patrick. So let's just go ahead and open up to questions for Laura, for Patrick. You can either unmute yourself and ask the question, or you could just chat, add in the chat. I have one already from the chat, but let's just open up to everybody and I'll go and talk to and, ask from the chat.
So while they gain some energy or enthusiasm for asking questions, let me just refer everybody to the chat for some resources. Thank you, De La Valle Labs, for putting that information in there. There's a lot of places that you can get your the depth or the quality tested. And then Allison on my team put in some links to resources from some of the websites that I shared.
Well, let me start with one question that I have. It's for Patrick, I guess. It's in the I noticed that in the transfer disclosure statement, it seems that there is more when it comes to quantity of water. It's on the buyer's side to find out whether there is enough water or not, but doesn't seem to be anything on the seller side if the seller knows there is not enough water, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. What I didn't do is highlight some of the verbiage on the seller's advisory. For example, there's a seller's advisory that's very specific that helps the seller to properly fill out a transfer disclosure statement. Another form called a seller property questionnaire form. So the onus is certainly on the seller, right? If they are aware of anything, if they've received any notice, if they've received any notice regarding allocation of water, right? If they're within the municipality, but if they know something about their well, and it's Murphy's Law, and we've seen it, right? Where the seller doesn't do that. And then of 10 or 12 well companies that the buyer could call, they call the one company where that went out there, right, 15 months ago and told the seller, yeah, buddy, you don't have a lot of life left, right, on the depth of your well or something else with the system. So absolutely, the onus is on the seller, right? If they are aware of a condition, they need to disclose it.
It's a disclosure. Okay, got it. Right. Okay. Same thing if it's because it was a little bit the transfer disclosure statement says something about quality, right? Mm-hmm. Water quality seems to be something that they or like I would say that in C1 under, yeah, C1, where they say, is there any substances, materials, products? I guess if they know something about the water quality that it's not good, then they need to disclose her under that, but okay, got it. All right.
Good question. Thank you.
I have a question here from Diane Ray. It says, some of the gated communities around the Fresno and Clovis area that have private lakes, a homeowner that lives on a lakefront lot is typically charged a premium fee per lineage foot. Does the extra fee stay within the HOA, or does it go to an outside agency that governs water usage to help in offsetting some of the cost of researching or ways or maintaining overall county water? You know, how do these lake communities get access to their lake water? And do they recycle or have ways for sustaining their lakes? You know, so I guess, you know, lake in these communities.
Yeah, I'll try not to get out of my area of expertise here, which is very limited. Yeah, I don't think that there's any usage of that water. There's no like reclamation of it, right? For landscaping purposes, right? Or things that are non-potable uses that I'm aware of. But certainly most of the HOAs around man-made lakes, let's just take Woodward Lake, for example, within the community, there may be 3 different association fees. So you could pay a homeowner association fee for living within Woodward Lake. And if you live within a gated community within Woodward Lakes, let's just say Mariner Circle, right? There's a HOA fee to live within Mariner Circle. Then if you live on the lake in Mariner Circle, right, there's yet another, an additional HOA fee for your frontage, right? And they did extensive work on the bulkhead, right, the banks of that lake here in the last 5 years. And I think that there was some special assessments. So not really for water usage, right, for drinking and for our yards, and that's more specific just to the aesthetic, I guess, of living on a man-made lake, if that helps.
Thank you. Also, we have a hand from Sue Reese, if you would. Yeah, there you go.
Sure. Hi.
Hi.
I have two questions, and I'm sorry I missed the first part of the presentation, so maybe this is already answered. I don't know. If a seller knows the depth of their well and discloses that, but the prediction is that it could go dry in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, what is the responsibility of the seller? Do you just simply say, this is the well depth that I know, and that's it? Or is there any kind of prediction in liability for what's coming from the future? I'm thinking not, but I wanted to ask. And then I have a second question, more complex.
I think, well, you want to go ahead, Laura? I'm sorry. You're on mute, Laura. Do you want to take that question or?
No, I think it's your question. Sorry.
Okay, yeah. So it's kind of like you sell a used car, and let's say it has low mileage. It's 50,000 miles on a 5-year-old car. The transmission could go out tomorrow, right? And you just don't know as a seller. So in good faith, you sell your car. In this case, in good faith, you sell your property with a well that is fully functioning and producing good water. And as Laura said, water moves, right? And we don't know what's going to drain it, and there's not a way to forecast that. So if the seller does not have a material fact about their well, then they would not be held liable of the future performance of that well.
Yeah, and just to add to that for Patrick, there's no way to predict. I mean, you can predict, but then next year it could rain, or there can be groundwater recharge areas going on around your area, where the home is, that weren't there a year ago, but are going to be there in 2 years. And the water moving around, we can predict maybe a year out, but more than that would be pretty tough.
Okay, so I didn't think there was much liability to the seller for future, but I kind of wanted to ask that question. And then the second part is, let's say that the water level, the well is shallow enough that the buyer says, I want a new well before I buy it. Is that completely on the seller then to put in the new well? And what are you seeing, or maybe you're not seeing, the impacts of the Sigma reviews, the length of time to get drillers out, so on and so forth, if a new well becomes a condition for purchase? What happens in a situation like that?
Yeah, that is so tough. It's really just back to the negotiating table. You know, buyer can decide not to buy the property, or a seller may say, I'm willing to put that in. But it's hard. The current environment where we've been in, with interest rates moving as fastly as we have, you know, a buyer would not want to, you know, hold off and say, you know what, I'll take the liability for that. I'm going to get an estimate. It could be $200,000. You know, to punch that well, right? Depending on what depths, right, they're having to go to in that area approximately, and then just try to go in and renegotiate the price and take on that responsibility themselves, because it was better for them to do that than to have interest rates go up, you know, any higher. If something like that comes up, right, during the investigation period, the disclosure period, then it's just back to negotiations. No mandate on the seller to have to do that. And you're absolutely right that, you know, time is not on anybody's side with well companies. It's very hard to get people out right now to drill a new well, so it can be timely.
And to add to what Patrick said, the resources that are available that I mentioned can be limited based on what you knew and if you're fairly new to the home. So if you say, you know, I know the well might go dry in a month, but I'll just call somebody to bring me a tank after that and get resources, they might not be available because you purchased the home knowing that that was going to happen. So you might take that into consideration as well when you're negotiating, that, you know, your resources might be limited if you're trying to get help for it.
Very good point, Laura. That's true. That's very true.
Any more questions?
Can you hear me? Hello. Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Tom Frizan, and I'm with Kings River Drilling, and we do an awful lot of water well inspections for real estate transactions. One of the things I'd like to mention, there's no standard in the industry for that particular product. So we have some companies that'll give you one page with a bunch of numbers on it at different flow rates. You have other companies that'll give you 16, 17, 18 pages. We have a tendency to give more information, but a couple of things that typically don't happen. Typically with the water well inspection, you typically do not pull the pump. So from the top of the ground, the only thing you could measure is to the top of water. So you may not know where the pump is set, nor the full depth of that well. Now we do try and go to the DWR website and see if that well was properly recorded with the state of California. Only about 2 out of 10 in Fresno County, for example, were ever properly reported. Madera County, we have a little higher percentage. So it depends on what county you're in, whether you could get the well information. Newer wells over the last year and a half are going through a different process. You actually log in with the state, so they automatically go into the state database early on. But it's the older wells, anything over 3 to 5 years, sometimes it's kind of problematic. When it comes to chemicals, chemicals are there's no one agency to go to talk about what's in the water. So what happens is, like our particular firm, we'll offer bacteria and nitrates. Those are 2 most common things that we find. But if somebody wants something else, I'm not there to recommend anything, because there's over 90 different potential chemicals that are governed by EPA. Okay, so I'm not, without knowing what's there, how do you you just can't recommend, you know, something to a potential buyer. So that sometimes is a little bit tricky. There is a big difference in where the water's at. We're in our third year of a drought. The first 2 years, the water tables were pretty predictable. What we're finding now is that in some areas they're plummeting a lot faster than we thought based about a year ago. And rarely does a water table come back up. Even if we had a deluge next year, that water has to percolate all the way down into the groundwater table, into the sand and things like that. And what we find, we really get our most recharge from the rivers, not from the rain that falls on top of the ground. So if you're close to Sanger, you typically have a pretty shallow well and you're pretty fortunate. If you're saying, like you said, up in Appaloosa Acres, that's a different story. If you're up in Madera Ranchos, water's dropping anywhere from 4 to 7 feet per year. And they're now drilling minimum depth to about 600 foot just for a domestic well. So there's a lot of interesting challenges out there.
Thank you, Tom, for that. That's great information.
Very good.
Tom, can I ask you what the going rate is for a well report? Not necessarily from you, but from some of the other drillers?
Okay, we charge kind of depending on where it's at. We charge anywhere from $700 to $750. And the only two chemicals we include for potability is, like I said before, bacteria and nitrates. The one thing that we do a little bit different than I think the other drillers, and just to give you a little bit of my background, I'm a licensed C57 water well contractor. I also have 2 engineering licenses. I have a degree in geology, and I'm also past president of the California Groundwater Association for local chapter. So I'm part of Kings River Drilling. Whenever we take a look at a well, I'm not so much interested in the pumping rate, because there's a lot of misunderstanding there. A lot of companies just will turn it on, put on a meter and check the pumping rate at different pressures. That's real common if they develop this table. I'm more interested, can the aquifer keep up with the pumping rate? So you can always change the pump. So we don't look at the different flow rates at different pressures. We try and predict what is the aquifer doing, because that's the expensive part. To drill a new well is a small fortune. To put a new pump in is obviously much less. So there's kind of a different way of looking at it. But again, we charge anywhere from $700 to $750, but we do not pull the pump.
Good information. Thank you.
Thank you. Seems worth, spending $700, $750 to find out a little bit about what you got there, Any more questions?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, it's really interesting because, again, just recently, over the last maybe 4 to 6 months, we've been running into things that I didn't anticipate, and it just seems like there's some real changes in the groundwater table. I'll give one quick example. We had drilled a well for the city of Dinuba, and this was for a play field. And when we drilled the well, the thing produced about 100 gallons a minute. It was just really a barnstormer. The pump company put the pump in, everything was great. Then they call me back 3 months later and say, we're out of water. How can you be out of water when, we were there, it's over 100 gallons a minute? Well, what we found out was that under the ground, sometimes you get different types of restrictions within the aquifer. And we were pulling from what kind of looked like a soup bowl buried in the ground, and our straw was in the soup bowl until we exhausted what was in the bowl, even though there's water outside of the bowl, if that makes any sense. So this underground stuff is really, really interesting. There is one company in Appaloosa Acres, of all places, who had multiple wells drilled, and he formed a company called National Groundwater Surveyors. He'll come out and do a electrical resistivity type testing to try and understand where there is and is not water in critical areas. So that may be another resource that you may have for your potential buyers or sellers. His name is Jay Shaw with National Groundwater Surveyors.
Great.
So the technology that is used to find where oil is, right? I mean, this kind of oil companies use this technology, sonars, and all this kind of stuff to find where the oil is located, the volume, and all that. Would that be too expensive of a technology to use for water, finding out the extent of water, groundwater?
Well, Jay Shaw uses something similar to that. He uses a electrical resistivity, and then it's combined with a minor seismic testing. So he takes that information and that gives them, graphs and things like that to kind of predict what's on the ground. To the best of my knowledge, there's only one other person in California that does that. He's further up north. But at the trade shows I've gone to, these are the only two guys that I've seen, and we're lucky enough to have one of those in our own backyard.
Right.
AJ,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, Fresno State Library has a map that kind of shows the groundwater, and how Tom is talking about how we don't know what's down there, and there could be a dip here. And do you mind if I show it?
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you see, let's see. Are you
showing-
seeing a 3D map? Okay,
Yeah.
so the top is the ground. And so this is the San Joaquin Valley, and this is how the mountains start going up. That's the top layer. The bottom layer is where the water levels were in fall of 2021 in each of the areas. So as you can see, it varies dramatically. So this is the Sacramento area up here, and then this is going through the Grapevine. As you can see, there's this high blue means a lot of water, very shallow, where right next to it is this cone of depression that is very red. So you could be 1 mile apart from each other and have water, and then your neighbor doesn't. Like Tom said, it's, we don't know what's going on underneath. There's just like the above, that there's hills and rivers. Some of the water moves, some of the water is static. It varies dramatically from place to place. And I like this graphic because it shows how different every area is.
Thank you. Excellent. All righty. Any other questions? Well, if there are no questions, then I guess we can end our session today. Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you, California Water Institute, London Properties, for all this valuable information. Of course, I think, why don't you, Laura, Laura and Patrick, why don't you put your email and your contact information in case people have any questions for you, and they can send you a private message. Like I said, we're going to post the PowerPoints, the videos, of this session on our website, on the California Water Institute website. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us, right?
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Laura, Patrick. You did great. Great information. Thank you, Tom, too. We're great information. I think he's gone. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you. Take care.